Greetings, night crawlers, and welcome. What you are about to hear is based on terrifying viral accounts and documented events. We are in Bangkok, long after the last train, when the streets belong to the lost. They say not every passenger who hails a cab after midnight arrives alive. Some are taken to places not on any map, while others are just ghosts, trying to travel home one last time. We will investigate 3 of Thailand's most chilling urban legends tonight. Hit subscribe, because you'll want to know the truth behind these spirits. Story 1. The 2 women in black formula makes the audience think, this could happen to me. Pravat was an ordinary man. He was 47, with a hairline that had retreated in defeat and a soft paunch that hung over his belt, a testament to long hours of sitting and quick. Greasy meals grabbed between fares. He was, in every sense, a man shaped by his job. His world was the 1990s Toyota Corolla he drove, a machine painted in a garish blast of neon pink, a rolling joke that had somehow become his primary source of income. His purpose was painfully simple: work. More specifically, work to pay for the mounting pile of white paper and blue ink that represented his daughter's medical bills. Anya was 8, and her lungs were weak, prone to fevers that spiked in the thick, wet Bangkok air. His wife, Maliha, worked at a noodle stall during the day, her hands permanently stained with Chilean broth. Pravat took the night shift. It paid better. The Farang, foreigners, were more generous. The drunks easier to overcharge. He felt a twinge of guilt, but Anya's medicine was expensive, and the streets were, for the most part, empty and fast. His environment was this cab. It was as familiar to him as his own skin. A string of Luang 4, holy amulets, dangled from the rearview mirror, clicking softly with every turn. The dashboard was cracked plastic, sticky with years of spilled Red Bull and humidity. A cheap, jasmine-scented air freshener, shaped like a Bodhi leaf, had long since given up. The car smelled of vinyl, old cigarettes, and the faint, sour tang of diesel fumes. The glowing green numbers of the meter were his god, his taskmaster, and his lifeline. This was his normal. This was his everyday. Tonight, that normality was feeling stretched thin. It was 2:17 a.m. The city had finally succumbed to the heat, lying still and breathless under a starless, polluted sky. The air was a physical weight, a hot, wet blanket you couldn't throw off. Setting, humid night. Pravat's shirt was plastered to his back. He'd been cruising for nearly an hour without a fare, just burning petrol he couldn't afford to waste. He'd left the crowded, sleepless streets of Sukhumvit and Nana, hoping to catch a late-night straggler from the Morchit bus terminal. Now he was in the old Bangsu district, a place of shadows and forgotten history, overshadowed by the new, monolithic grand station that sat like a parked spaceship nearby. But Pravat wasn't on the new, bright roads. He was on Kamphaeng Phet 2 Road, a long, lonely stretch that ran parallel to the old railway lines. It was a liminal space, caught between the sleeping suburbs and the industrial guts of the city. Here, the streetlights were few and far between, casting weak, yellow pools on the cracked pavement. To his left, the dark, skeletal shapes of maintenance sheds and forgotten warehouses. To his right, a high brick wall, crumbling in places, that separated the road from the older, overgrown sections of the railway. He yawned, the sound cracking in the quiet cab. One more, just one more good fare, and he could go home. He could park the pink beast, take a cold shower, and sit by Anya's mat for an hour, just to hear her breathe. That was the goal. That was the simple purpose that kept his eyes open. He passed a set of tall ornate gates on his left, the entrance to an old, dark temple complex. Setting, temple gates ahead. The road ahead was a straight, dark ribbon. Setting, empty road. And then he saw them, 2 figures standing by the side of the road, just past the temple gates. He slowed down, his professional instincts kicking in. His foot hovered over the brake. They were women. Both were dressed entirely in black, not the short, modern black of a party dress, but heavy, formal, old-fashioned Thai outfits, shoot Thai sidam, mourning clothes. Their hair was pulled back severely, and their faces were obscured by the darkness and what looked like thin, black veils. One of them raised a hand, not a wave, just a slow, deliberate lift. Pravat's first thought was, no. This was the part of the night where bad things happened. This was the empty road, the strange location. His wife's voice echoed in his head. Don't pick up strangers in strange places. Some. He started to accelerate, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But then he glanced in the side mirror. They hadn't moved. They just stood there, two pillars of shadow, watching him go. He saw the glowing green numbers of his meter, 0.00. He saw, in his mind's eye, the white envelope from the hospital. They're just two women, he argued with himself, probably coming from a funeral at the temple. What's the harm? They look small, they don't look dangerous, and he needed the money. His foot slammed on the brake. The taxi groaned. He put the car in reverse, the backing up chime beeping loudly, obscenely, in the dead quiet. He pulled up alongside them. He hit the button to unlock the back doors and leaned over, his voice hoarse from lack of use. Where to? Ladies? The back door opened. The click of the latch felt unnaturally loud, a sharp crack in the humid air. One woman slid in, then the other. They were silent. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, their black dresses rustling like dry leaves. The door shut with a heavy, final thud. Pravat looked in the rearview mirror. He couldn't see their faces clearly. The veils were thicker than he thought, and the shadows in the back seat were deep. They sat perfectly still, hands folded in their laps. Where to? He repeated, a little louder. A voice, so soft it was barely breath, whispered from the back. The railway crossing, just ahead. Pravat nodded. The crossing at Pradifat Road? No, the other voice whispered. It was just as faint, but somehow different, higher. The old crossing, the one by the canal. Pravat frowned. The old crossing? That line had been closed for years. There was nothing there but rusty tracks and weeds. But a fare was a fare. He pressed the button on his meter. The green numbers flipped to the base fare, 35 baht. He pulled the car into gear and started driving down the empty road. This, he thought, could happen to anyone. He was just a man, doing his job. Fear, beat 1. Temperature drops inside the taxi. For the first minute, the only sounds were the clicking of the old amulets and the hum of the tyres on the pavement. Pravat tried to make small talk. It was a habit. A silent passenger was a nervous passenger. Coming from the temple, he asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Silence. The two shapes in the back did not move. Late night for a service, he tried again, fumbling. From the back, a single, soft sound, a sniffle, like someone was quietly crying. Pravat winced. Okay. Pravat, shut up. They're grieving. He turned his attention back to the road. That's when he felt it. The chill. It started at the back of his neck. A cold prickle, like an ice cube being slowly dragged down his spine. His AC was on, but it was an old, weak unit. It wheezed and puffed out air that was, at best, slightly less humid than the air outside. This was not the AC. This was a deep, penetrating cold. It was a damp cold, like a wet sheet. He shivered, his arms erupting in goosebumps. He looked down at the AC controls. He even turned the dial down, making it blow warmer air. The cold got worse. It was rolling out of the back seat in waves. He could feel it pooling around his ankles, climbing up his legs. His fingers, gripping the steering wheel, began to ache. Poor thought, he said, his voice tight. Is Is the air too strong? Are you cold? The only reply was the same, soft, wet sniffle. Pravat looked in the rearview mirror again. This time, he saw something new, his own breath. It was misting in front of his face, a small white cloud, in a Bangkok taxi, in the middle of a 30-degree, humid night. He stared, terrified. The windows, they were fogging up, not on the outside, from the humidity, but on the inside. A strange, grey mist was creeping up the glass, starting from the back and moving forward. "What is—" he whispered. He reached out a trembling hand and wiped the driver's side window. His fingers came away wet, not with condensation, but with something slimy. And the smell, the cheap jasmine air freshener was long gone. The smell of diesel and old smoke was gone, too. A new smell was filling the cab. It was the smell of damp earth, the smell of a riverbank after a flood. And under that, something cloyingly sweet, jasmine, but not fresh jasmine. It was the scent of funeral flowers, days old, beginning to rot. He was breathing it in. It was thick in his throat. He coughed. He looked down at the meter. The green numbers were gone. The display was black. "My meter!" he yelped, his voice cracking. It's broken. The power." He slapped the side of the unit. Nothing. He checked the car's clock. The display was dark. The radio, dead. The dashboard lights, gone. Only the headlights were still on, cutting a weak path through the fog that was now outside the car as well, a mist that hadn't been there seconds before. The engine was still running, but everything else was dead. "The fare," he stammered. "It's okay. I'll just charge the flat rate." A whisper from the back seat. It cut through the cold, through his panic, and seemed to land directly inside his ear. "It doesn't matter. We are here." Pravat looked up. Ahead, through the swirling fog, he saw them, the old, rusty tracks, the destination. He stopped the car. The engine idled, the only sound in a world that had gone completely silent. He had stopped right on top of the tracks. A sudden, professional revulsion hit him. Never stop on the tracks. Never. It was the first rule. I can't stop here. Ladies," he said, his hand moving to the gear stick. "It's not safe. Let me pull over." "It is safe," the first voice whispered. "No trains come here." The second voice echoed. "Not for a long, long time." He looked in the rearview mirror. He could see them more clearly now. The fog in the car had receded, concentrating itself on the windows. They had lifted their veils. Their faces were pale, impossibly, unnaturally white, like wet marble. Their eyes were just dark pits. Their black, wet hair was plastered to their foreheads. They weren't crying. They were smiling. And then, Pravat heard it. Fear beat. 2. Phantom train returns. It was faint at first, a sound under the sound of his idling engine. Clack, 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 clack. It was a rhythmic, metallic sound, a sound Pravat hadn't heard in years, not since they decommissioned these old lines. "What is that?" he whispered. His blood had turned to ice. The cold in the cab was nothing compared to the cold in his heart. Clack, 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 clack. It was getting louder. He looked in the mirror. The women were no longer looking at him. They were both turned, in perfect sync, and were staring out the back window, down the dark, fog-shrouded tracks. "No," Pravat said. He grabbed the gear stick. "No, this is not possible." He tried to pull it into reverse. It wouldn't move. It was locked, as if welded in place. "Move!" he screamed at it, yanking with all his strength. And then the light hit. A single, brilliant white headlight cut through the fog, so bright it made Pravat scream and throw an arm over his eyes. It was coming from the direction of the city. It was coming fast. With the light came the sound, a horn, not the high, electric beep-beep of a modern skytrain, or the honk of a diesel engine. It was a steam whistle, a long, mournful, deafening shriek that seemed to shake the very atoms of the car. It was a sound from a different century. Get out! Pravat roared, his terror finally breaking through his paralysis. He fumbled for his door handle. It was locked. He slammed the electronic unlock button on the armrest. Nothing. The electronics were dead. The train was closer. He could feel the thump of it in his chest. The clack, clack, clack was a deafening roar. The whistle shrieked again, a sound of pure, metallic rage. He turned to the back seat, to the women. His mind broken. He would smash the windows. They had to get out. We have to! He stopped. The back seat was empty. The cold was gone. The smell of damp earth was gone. The only thing that remained was the overwhelming, sickeningly sweet smell of rotting jasmine and the locked doors. Pravat turned back to the windshield. The light was no longer a light. It was the entire world. It filled the taxi, bleaching everything white. The steam whistle was a solid physical blow, a scream that was inside his head, in his teeth, in his bones. He saw the massive black iron grille of an old-fashioned steam engine, 20 feet tall, bearing down on him. He had just enough time to raise his hands, his holy amulet swinging wildly, before he screamed. The world ended in a blast of steam and a universe of tearing metal. The aftermath silence. Absolute, profound silence. Pravat opened his eyes. He was alive. He was shaking so violently his teeth chattered. The sound was horribly loud in the quiet. He was sitting in his pink taxi. The engine was off. The key was in the ignition, turned to the off position. He was parked on the rusty tracks. There was no train, no light, no sound. The fog was gone. The night was still, humid and quiet, just as it had been before. His amulets were still, resting on the dashboard. Did I fall asleep? He thought, his mind grasping for a rational explanation. A nightmare? A stress-induced? He fumbled for the key. His hand was shaking so badly he missed the slot twice. On the third try, he got it in. He turned the key. The car roared to life. The dashboard lights flickered on. The radio crackled with static, then settled on a faint Luke Thung song. The green numbers of the meter lit up, 0.00. He didn't wait. He didn't think. He slammed the gear stick into reverse. It moved easily now, and stomped on the accelerator. The tires shrieked on the gravel and ballast as the taxi shot backward, lurching off the tracks and skidding to a stop on the dirt shoulder 50 meters away. He killed the engine and fell out of the car, vomiting onto the weeds. He retched until his stomach was empty, his body heaving with violent, agonizing spasms. When he was finished, he lay on the ground, panting, the smell of his own sick mixing with the damp night air. He was alive. It was a dream. It had to be. A terrible, waking nightmare. He got to his feet, his legs feeling like overcooked noodles. He needed to check the car. He needed to prove to himself that it was a dream. He walked to the back door, the one the women had used. It was closed. He reached for the handle. He noticed his hand, in the dim glow of the moonlight, was streaked with something, a slimy, grey fog, the residue from the window. His heart stopped. He opened the back door. The seat was empty. He let out a shaky breath of relief, but the floor mat wasn't, where their feet would have been. There were two small, perfect puddles of dark, muddy water. They smelled of the river. They smelled of the grave, and floating in one of the puddles, like a discarded, waterlogged leaf, was a small, square piece of paper. His hand, moving against his will, reached down and picked it up. It was a newspaper clipping. It was yellowed, ancient, and falling apart in his fingers. The Thai script was an old-fashioned font. It was soaked. He pulled out his phone, his thumb fumbling to turn on the flashlight. He illuminated the clipping. He could only read parts of it. The water had blurred much of the ink, but the headline was clear. Tragedy at Bang Sue Crossing. 2 sisters killed. He read the fragmented text below. Returning from their mother's funeral. Car stalled on the tracks. The 2:37 a.m. Unable to stop. Miss Naleen and Miss Pawnthip. Pronounced dead at the scene, Pravat's eyes shot to his phone. To the time, 2:37 a.m. He screamed. It was a dry, terrible sound. He dropped the clipping as if it were on fire. He understood. They hadn't been going to the crossing. They had been returning to it. He scrambled back into his driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. He started the car and drove. He didn't care about the roads. He just drove, his headlights cutting through the night, tears of pure, undiluted terror streaming down his face. He didn't remember the drive home. He just arrived. He burst into his small apartment, waking his wife, who shot up with a cry of alarm. He didn't say anything. He just ran to his daughter's mat, fell to his knees, and held her small, warm hand, listening to the sound of her breathing. He stayed there, clutching his amulets, until the sun came up. Pravat sold the taxi the next day for scrap. He took a loss, but he didn't care. He would never drive at night again. He got a job as a security guard at a shopping mall, a noisy, bright place, full of life. But even now, years later, when he's on his break, staring out at the parking lot, he thinks about that night. He thinks about the impossible cold, the smell of funeral jasmine, and the sound of a train that shouldn't exist. And he thinks about the question, the one that haunts him, the one that haunts all the drivers who have heard his story, whispered in hushed tones at late-night canteens. When you drive late at night, when the city is a graveyard of sleeping buildings, and the roads are empty and black, if someone flags you down, standing silently in the dark, would you stop? Story 2. The Jungle Curse. Phong Khoi. The humidity of the Isan jungle was a physical weight. It pressed on Thanafat's chest, beaded on his forehead, skulktuan, and fogged his Nikon lens the instant he uncapped it. He was a man of steel, glass, and digital sensors. He despised the organic, uncontrolled chaos of the deep wilderness, but National Geographic paid exceptionally well for unspoiled, and this remote corner of the northeast, bordering Laos, was as unspoiled as it got. "We camp here, Khoon Thanafat," said Chayo, his local guide. Chayo was a man carved from teak, his face a roadmap of sun-scorched wrinkles. He spoke little, and when he did, it was in short, declarative sentences. Thanafat sighed, lowering his heavy pack. "Here, the light is terrible. The canopy is too dense. We'll get nothing for the golden hour. The light does not matter. The ground is high," Chayo replied, already unlashing his hammock. "We are clear. We can see. More important, we can be seen." This was the part Thanafat hated, the local superstition. For 3 days, Chayo had been a font of bizarre, unbreakable rules. Do not whistle after dark. Do not call another's name. Do not speak of tigers. And the most important one, repeated every single night. We sleep high. Never, ever sleep close to the ground. As Thanafat began rigging his own hammock between a thick-girthed ironwood and a younger, more pliable banyan tree, he noticed something. The forest floor wasn't just soil and leaves. In the clearing Chayo had chosen, the leaf litter was disturbed, pushed aside in a strange, repeating pattern. It looked like a series of small, shallow, circular depressions, spaced roughly a meter apart, leading from the dense undergrowth and stopping right at the edge of their camp. "Weird," Thanafat muttered, nudging one of the depressions with his boot. "What made these? Looks like someone was pounding yams." Chayo, who was pulling a line taut, froze. He looked at the marks, then at Thanafat. His face, usually impassive, tightened. "A poacher, maybe," he said, too quickly. "Or a deer." Landing awkwardly, he turned back to his work, his movements suddenly jerky. But the explanation felt hollow. A deer, a poacher. The marks were singular, heavy, and methodical. They didn't look like the tracks of a 2-legged or 4-legged animal. They looked like something heavy had been dropped, over and over, in a straight line. Thanafat, however, had a lens to clean. He shrugged. The jungle was full of weird things. That's why he was here. His dismissal was his first mistake. In the city, the unexplained was a curiosity. In the jungle, the unexplained was a law, and he had just ignored the first reading. Dusk fell like a suffocating blanket. The sounds of the day, birds, monkeys, were vacuumed into silence, replaced by the deafening multi-thousand-part orchestra of insects. Cicadas shrieked like failing electronics. Unknown things chirped and clicked. Thanafat ate his dehydrated meal cold, too tired to bother with the stove. "Check your knots, coon," Chayot said, nodding at Thanafat's hammock. "The banyan branch is thin." "It's fine, Chayot. It'll hold me. I'm a photographer, not a water buffalo." "The rule is not about your weight," Chayot said quietly, his back to Thanafat as he secured his own belongings high in a tree. "It is about the ground. Never sleep close to the ground." Yeah. Snakes, bugs. I get it." Thanafat zipped himself into his mosquito net, rocked himself into the hammock, and put his noise-cancelling earbuds in, playing a low-level white noise to drown out the jungle. He was asleep in minutes. He woke up hours later, violently. Crack! The sound was explosive, followed by a sickening drop. The banyan branch had given way. Thanafat crashed to the earth, a messy, tangled explosion of ripstop nylon, mosquito netting and sleeping bag. He hit the ground hard, his ankle twisting painfully under him. "Damn it! Araiwa!" He cursed into the blackness. He was completely cocooned in his own gear. He thrashed, finally finding the zipper on his sleeping bag and tearing at the net. He was on his hands and knees, breathing heavily. The forest was utterly silent, as if his fall had pressed a universal mute button. Even the cicadas had stopped. He flicked on his headlamp. The beam cut a weak, misty cone in the darkness. His hammock was a useless pile. The broken branch hung limply, leaking sap. Above him, he could see Chayot in his own hammock, a still, dark shape, seemingly undisturbed. Thanafat's ankle throbbed. He was covered in dirt. It was pitch black, humid, and at least 4 hours until dawn. He looked at the tangled mess of ropes and fabric. He was tired. He was in pain. The idea of trying to rehang his hammock in the dark, on one foot, was impossible. He'd have to untangle the ropes, find 2 new trees, tie knots he barely understood. "Screw it," he whispered. This was the critical decision. To hell with the rules. He had a ground sheet and his sleeping bag. The ground was soft leaf litter, not rocks. "I'll be fine. What's the worst that can happen? A centipede. I'll zip the bag to my chin." He unrolled his ground sheet, threw the sleeping bag on top of it, and crawled in. Wincing as he moved his ankle, he was breaking the cardinal rule, but his rational, city-bred mind told him the rule was for children, based on fears of snakes and scorpions, both of which his high-tech sleeping bag could easily repel. He was on the ground, but he was safe. The audience knows the rule. The audience knows the title of the story. Sleeping on the ground is not about snakes. It is an invitation. Thanafat, in his pained arrogance, had just unlocked his own door and laid out a welcome mat. He fell into a shallow, fitful sleep, his head still buzzing from the fall. He dreamed of his apartment in Bangkok, of the cool tile floors, of the skyline. Then, a sound pulled him to the surface of consciousness. Thump. A pause. Thump. It was a new sound. It wasn't the click of an insect or the slither of a reptile. It was heavy, rhythmic, and wet. It sounded like a man carrying a heavy, waterlogged sack of rice, dropping it every few feet as he moved. It was the sound of a single, heavy impact, followed by a drag, and then another impact. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. Thanafat's eyes snapped open inside the darkness of his sleeping bag. What in God's name is that? His heart hammered. It's Chayot, he told himself. He got up to relieve himself. He has a staff. He's walking with a limp. But that made no sense. The sound was too heavy. 2, singular. It was moving toward the camp. Thump, pause, thump. It was closer now, right at the edge of the clearing. This is the signal, the one-legged ghost. The audience is screaming at Thanafat to get up, to climb a tree, to do anything but lie there. He was a man of logic. He listened, trying to classify it. A large bird? A tapir? No. His photographer's brain, trained to identify wildlife, could find no file for this. It was the sound of a pogo stick made of meat. The sound was wrong. It was an acoustic violation. Then, a new sound, a voice. It was a dry, rasping whisper, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Koi, koi. Thanafat stopped breathing. The sound was unearthly. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't human. It was sibilant, dry, and questioning. It sounded like a word, but also like the call of a profoundly sick animal. Koi, koi. A bird, he breathed, his voice trembling. It has to be a bird, a rare, nocturnal, jungle bird, a nightjar. That's it. He was a scientist in his own way. Everything had an explanation. He just didn't know this one. He pulled the sleeping bag tighter, a pathetic nylon shield against the unknown. He squeezed his eyes shut. Go away, go away. It's a bird, it's a bird, it's a bird. He drifted into a state that was not sleep, but a feverish, heavy paralysis. He felt, rather than saw, something enter the camp. The thumping stopped, replaced by a feeling of immense pressure in the air. The humidity suddenly spiked, and with it came a new smell. It was the smell of a wet cave, of rotting fruit, of damp grave soil. It was overpoweringly foul, a smell of ancient decay and stagnant water. It was right outside his sleeping bag. He was pinned. Sleep paralysis. He tried to scream, to move his arms. He was locked in his own body. He could feel a heavy, focused presence hovering over him. It was assessing him. He could feel its attention on his feet, which were pressed against the bottom of the sleeping bag. Then he felt a weight, a single, heavy, cold weight pressed down on his left foot. It pressed through the high-tech fabric, through his sock, as if they weren't there. It wasn't a hand. It was a cold, dense, circular pressure. He felt a dreadful, cold, sucking sensation, a vacuum of energy pulling from the sole of his foot. It didn't hurt. It was worse. It felt like a part of his soul was being drawn out through his toe. He must have blacked out. He woke to the sharp, angry call of a hornbill and sunlight filtering through the trees. He gasped, sitting bolt upright. He was soaked in sweat. His heart felt like it was trying to escape his chest. You are a fool, Kun Thanafat. Chayot was standing over him, his face a mask of cold fury and something else, fear. You slept on the ground. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. My hammock broke, Thanafat stammered, scrambling out of the sleeping bag. I fell. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to wake me. You were supposed to climb a tree. You do anything but sleep on the ground. Shayo was almost shouting, a shocking break from his usual calm. This is not a game. You do not know the rules here. Rules? I was attacked. In my sleep, Thanafat said, his voice shaky. There was something, a person, or I don't know. Chayot's eyes widened. What did you hear? A sound, a thumping, hopping, and a voice. Koi, koi. Chayo let out a long, slow breath, his face going pale beneath his tan. He grabbed his pack. We leave, now. Pack your things. We do not stop until we reach the village. What? I'm not leaving. I have a job to do. My ankle is twisted, but I'm fine. It was just a nightmare. Sleep paralysis from the fall. Thanafat stopped. His left foot, the one that had been pressed, felt numb and cold. He sat down and pulled off his wool sock. Oh my God, he whispered. On the sole of his left foot, just below his big toe, was a bruise, but it was no ordinary bruise. It wasn't the mottled, uneven purple of a simple impact. It was a perfect dark circle, the size of a silver dollar. It was a deep, necrotic violet that faded to a sickly yellow at the edges. It didn't hurt when he pressed it. In fact, he couldn't feel his own finger on it. The skin was numb, cold, and felt dead. I must have landed on a rock, he said, his voice lacking all conviction. When I fell, a perfectly round, sharp rock. This is the mark, the action spike. The story said the ghost marks its victim. This is the stamp, the claim of ownership. Chayot saw the mark and his blood ran cold. He didn't need to look for a rock. He knew, as any local knew, that the Fongkoi did not strike with a fist. It did not bite with a fang. It marked you. It tasted you. And it never, ever forgot the taste. There was no rock, Chayot said, his voice flat. He grabbed Thanafat's camera bag and thrust it at him. It has touched you. It has marked you. Now we must go, before it comes back for the rest. The hike back was a 9-hour silent torture. Thanafat, adrenaline and terror numbing his ankle, limped behind Chayo, who moved with a frantic, desperate energy. Thanafat's mind was at war with itself. The rational photographer versus the terrified man. It was a dream. The bruises from the fall. The thump was a deer. The koi was a bird. It all has an explanation. But as they hiked, he kept hearing it, faintly, in the distance, behind them, a slow, methodical, unhurried pursuit. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It's an echo, he told himself. An echo of Chayot's footsteps, or my own pulse in my ears. It's not an echo. It's following them. It's not in a hurry. It has all the time in the world. When they reached the village, Chayo took Thanafat straight to the oldest monk at the local wat. The monk, a tiny man with translucent skin, looked at the mark on Thanafat's foot and chanted for an hour, finally tying a white sai-sin thread around his wrist. "Do not return to the jungle," the monk said, his voice like dry paper. "It has your scent. It knows your taste. Stay in the city. Stay high. Stay off the ground." Thanafat fled. He paid Chayot triple, got a ride to Udon Thani, and was on the first flight back to Bangkok. 2 weeks later, he was in his high-rise condo on the 22nd floor, overlooking the glittering, chaotic sprawl of the city. The jungle was a green, humid memory. His ankle was healed. The SIE sin thread was still on his wrist, a flimsy white souvenir. The photos were spectacular. National Geographic was thrilled, but the mark on his foot had not faded. The perfect violet circle was as dark and numb as the day he'd gotten it. Sometimes, at night, it itched, a cold, deep itch that no amount of scratching could reach. He was working late, 3 a.m., editing the last of the photos. The city was quiet. His condo was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. He was barefoot, his left foot resting on the cool marble floor. He was editing a macro shot of an orchid. In the background, out of focus, was a shape, just a blur. He thought, a branch. He zoomed in. It wasn't a branch. It was something, long, bent, and dark. Lens smudge. He deleted the file, annoyed. He stood up to get a beer from the fridge. He stopped. From the hallway outside his locked apartment door, he heard a sound. Thump. Pause. Thump. Pause. "No," he whispered. "Impossible." His blood turned to ice. "It's the elevator, the machinery. It's Mrs. Somshree next door, dragging her laundry." But the sound was wrong. It was heavy. It was wet. It was hopping. The audience knows. It has crossed the country. It has climbed the 22 floors. The mark is a beacon, and it has come to collect. The thumping stopped. Right outside his door. Thanafat stood frozen in his minimalist living room, a monument of civilized terror. He stared at the door. Silence. See? His rational mind screamed. It was nothing. It was the pipes. You're just spooked. Then, from the air conditioning vent above his head, a dry, sibilant whisper. It was not a bird. It was not the wind. It was the same sound from the jungle, but it was here. It was inside. Koi, koi. Thanafat stared at the vent. The story was true. He had escaped the jungle, but the curse had followed him home. The mark on his foot throbbed. A sudden, piercing, icy cold. He had broken the rule. He had slept on the ground, and the thing that owned the ground had come to claim its property. Story 3. The postpartum ghost in the cursed apartment. The ink on the lease was barely dry. Nurse Lawan, Jum Srisuwan, stared at the peeling paint on the door of apartment 604, her key hovering over the lock. The number 6 was slightly crooked, dangling by a single, rust-flecked screw. Rachada Tower wasn't a luxury building. It was a concrete monolith from the 1980s, stained by decades of rain, smog, and quiet desperation. But it was all Jum could afford. A brutal divorce had cleaved her life in two, and her salary as a paediatric nurse at the nearby hospital was stretched thin over alimony and debt. Apartment 604 was cheap, unbelievably cheap. The landlord, a wiry man with a chain-smoker's cough and eyes that never quite met hers, had rushed her through the viewing. Good ventilation, he'd rasped, gesturing at a grimy window that overlooked a landscape of tar paper roofs. Quiet neighbours. He hadn't lied about the quiet. As June pushed the door open, the silence of the apartment rushed out to meet her. Thick and musty, it smelled of old pipes, dust, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like spoiled milk. She dropped her single suitcase and a cardboard box labelled kitchen on the linoleum floor. Exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a 36-hour double shift, pulled at her. The apartment was small, a main room, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom. In the corner of the main room, the floorboards were darker than the rest, a discoloured, map-like stain that she'd consciously decided to ignore. She'd buy a rug. That first night, she didn't even bother with the bed. She collapsed onto the bare mattress, still in her scrubs, and fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Strange events repeat. The first time it happened, she mistook it for a dream. A sound, thin and sharp, pierced the 3 a.m. stillness. It was the sound of weeping, not a baby's cry. She was agonizingly familiar with those, but a woman's. It was a sound of profound, bottomless grief, a sobbing that seemed to scrape the air. Jum's eyes snapped open. The room was black. The crying was coming from the hallway. Great, she thought, her nurse's pragmatism kicking in. A neighbour with relationship problems. She rolled over, pulling the thin pillow over her head. The sobbing continued, rhythmic and desolate, before finally fading away as the first hint of dawn greyed the window. The next night, she was better prepared. She'd worked another 12-hour shift, her feet throbbing, her mind numb from the relentless beep of heart monitors. She showered, the water pressure a pathetic trickle, and climbed into bed, earplugs firmly in place. It made no difference. At 3:07 a.m., the sound jolted her awake. It was louder. The earplugs only seemed to muffle the background hum of the city, making the crying clearer, more intimate. It wasn't just in the hallway. It was right outside her door. A desperate, pleading wail. June sat up, her heart suddenly tight in her chest. She was a professional, trained for emergencies. She wasn't prone to panic. She slipped out of bed and crept to the door, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the peephole. The cheap plastic lens was cloudy, distorting the hallway into a nauseating fisheye view. The corridor was empty. A single fluorescent tube at the far end flickered. casting a sickly yellow light on the peeling wallpaper. There was no one there. As she watched, the light flickered and went out, plunging the hallway into darkness. And in that precise moment, the crying stopped, not faded, but cut off, as if a switch had been thrown. All that remained was the smell, that same faint, sweet, spoiled milk scent, now seeping under her door. Intensity increases. Life and work had to go on. June developed a routine. She'd come home, the fluorescent lights of the hospital burning behind her eyelids, and brace herself. She'd turn on the television for noise, but it didn't help. At 3:07 a.m., the crying would begin. It became her unwelcome clock. On the fourth night, something changed. The crying started as usual, a miserable sound from the hallway. But then, it moved. She heard it travel from the door, past her kitchen, and stop inside the bathroom. June froze, sitting bolt upright in bed. The thin, louvered door to the bathroom was closed. From behind it, the sobbing intensified, punctuated by desperate, gasping breaths. It sounded like someone was drowning in their own sorrow. "Who's in there?" June yelled, her voice sharper than she intended. "This isn't funny." The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier, more threatening than the noise had been. She waited a full minute, her pulse hammering in her ears, before she got up and threw the bathroom door open. Empty. The small, windowless room was empty. The mirror above the sink was cracked in one corner. The air was cold, and the mirror was fogged. It was completely opaque, covered in a thick grey condensation, as if someone had just taken a scaldingly hot shower. But the room was frigid. June could see her own breath plume in the air. She stared at the fogged-up glass. Her training told her this was impossible. Condensation required a temperature differential, heat and moisture. This was the opposite. This was a pocket of absolute, unnatural cold. As she watched, something began to form in the mist. It wasn't her reflection. It was writing, slow, shaky letters, as if being traced by an invisible finger from the other side of the glass. W-H-Y. June stumbled back, hitting her arm against the doorframe. She didn't scream. A cold, analytical terror gripped her. She was hallucinating. It was the stress, the long hours, the grief from her divorce. She lunged forward and wiped the glass with the sleeve of her pajamas. The condensation vanished, along with the letters. The mirror was just a mirror, reflecting her own pale, terrified face. But her sleeve was damp, and the smell of spoiled milk was so strong it made her gag. No one else notices or believes. The next day, she couldn't focus. She nearly administered the wrong dosage to a newborn in the NICU. Her hands shaking so badly that her senior colleague, Ploy, had to take over. "June, what is wrong with you?" Ploy asked sternly, steering her into the break room. I'm not sleeping," June admitted, sinking into a plastic chair. "My new apartment. There's this noise, a woman crying, every night. And last night, I think I saw something, writing, on my mirror." Ploy's expression softened, but not with belief. It was with pity. "June," she said gently, placing a hand on her arm. "You're burned out. We've all been there. You're working doubles. You just went through a messy divorce. You're seeing and hearing things that aren't there. Auditory hallucinations are a classic symptom of extreme stress. It was real, Ploy. The mirror was fogged. It was freezing cold. So, a pipe burst, a draft, there's a rational explanation for everything. You're a woman of science. June, don't let this city make you crazy. Take a night off. Take a sleeping pill." June left the conversation feeling worse. She wasn't just terrified. She was isolated. Ploy hadn't believed her. She had been dismissed. Her terror reduced to a medical symptom. That afternoon, she confronted the landlord. She found him smoking in the alley behind the tower. "I want to complain about the noise in 604, she said, trying to keep her voice firm. The landlord's head snapped up. He dropped his cigarette, his eyes wide with something she couldn't place. "Fear? Noise? What noise?" he stammered. "A woman, crying, every night. It's coming from inside my apartment." The man's sallow skin went a shade paler. He took a step back, holding up his hands. "No. No noise in 604. Apartment is quiet, always quiet. I'm not imagining it. And there's a problem with the bathroom. The mirror." "No problem," he almost shouted, cutting her off. "You're tired. Go sleep. No refunds. You signed the lease. 1 year." He turned and practically fled, disappearing into a stairwell, leaving June alone in the alley. Her heart sank. He knows. The way he reacted. He wasn't dismissive like Ploy. He was terrified. He knew exactly what she was talking about. And he had locked her into a 1-year lease. She was trapped. Strange events repeat, plus intensity increases. The isolation fed the fear, and the fear fed the phenomenon. The entity in apartment 604, she couldn't deny it was an entity anymore, grew bolder. The nightly crying at 3:07 a.m. was now a given. But it was no longer just crying. It was a full-blown display of grief. She would be woken by the sound of wailing, and then a new sound, a soft, desperate thump, thump, thump against the walls, as if someone was frantically searching, patting every surface. Things began to move. She would come home from the hospital to find her suitcase, which she kept at the foot of her bed, dragged into the centre of the room. The small rug she'd bought to cover the dark stain on the floor was perpetually kicked aside, exposing the discoloured boards. The kitchen cupboards, which she knew she had closed, would be wide open, but the focus was always the bathroom. The cold was constant now. The bathroom was like an icebox. She stopped using it at night, opting for the communal toilets down in the lobby, claiming her plumbing was broken. The mirror became the spirit's canvas. The simple why was gone. Now, full sentences would appear. She'd walk in, and the glass would be opaque, the temperature in the room dropping to near freezing. "He was mine. Where is he? Give him back to me." June would stand there, her body rigid with terror, and whisper, "Who? Who are you talking about?" The letters would dissolve, and a new, more aggressive message would scrawl itself across the glass. "Liar, one evening, she came home to find a small knitted baby bootie on her pillow. It was white, with a single blue ribbon. It was damp and smelled faintly of earth. June hadn't bought it. She had no children. She had no visitors. She picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. It was impossibly cold. She threw it in the trash, her hands shaking. The next morning, it was back on her pillow. The climax, the truth. She had been in the apartment for 3 weeks. She was a wreck. She was living on caffeine and fear, jumping at every sound. At the hospital, she was clumsy, unfocused. Ploy was now forcing her to take a week of mandatory leave. "You need help, June," Ploy had insisted. Real, professional help. Now she had nowhere to go. She was on leave, with no money to go to a hotel, trapped in the one place she couldn't bear to be. That night, she decided to stay awake. She sat on the mattress, her back against the wall, a small lamp on. She wouldn't be taken by surprise. 3:00 a.m., the air in the room grew heavy. 3:03 a.m., the temperature plummeted. 3:06 a.m., the lamp on her nightstand flickered, the bulb buzzing. 3:07 a.m., the crying began. It was not in the hall. It was not in the bathroom. It was in her ear. A deafening, heartbroken wail that was everywhere at once. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. June screamed, scrambling off the bed. The lamp went out, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the grey glow of the city outside. "What do you want from me?" she shrieked at the empty room. The crying stopped. The oppressive silence returned, thicker than before. And then, a voice, a sibilant, watery whisper that seemed to come from inside her own head. "My baby. Where is my baby?" The spiritual motive laid bare. It wasn't just grief. It was a search. A mother, frantically, eternally, searching for her child. "I don't have your baby!" June cried, tears of terror and frustration streaming down her face. "I don't know where he is." She backed away, stumbling toward the bathroom. It was her only escape. Though she knew it was the source, she fumbled for the light switch. It didn't work. The room was black. But the mirror was glowing. It was glowing with a faint, phosphorescent light, the fog on its surface swirling, and the letters began to form, burning themselves into the glass with a furious ice energy. Why did you take my room?" The final question hung in the air, pulsing with cold light. "It was cheap," June sobbed, pressing herself against the hallway wall. "I'm a nurse. I just needed a place to sleep. I didn't take anything." "You took his room," the voice whispered. It was no longer in her head. It was standing right behind her. She could feel a coldness on the back of her neck, like freezer burn, the unmistakable pressure of a hand on her shoulder. "He is here." "He's not here," June yelled. "There's no one here but me." Liar. The presence shoved her. It was a violent physical push, and June fell forward, sprawling onto the floor of the main room. She landed hard, her hands scraping on the rough floorboards. She landed right on the rug she had bought. It slid aside, revealing the dark, stained patch of flooring beneath. The crying had stopped. The whispering had stopped. The only sound was June's own ragged breathing, the cold. It wasn't in the bathroom anymore. It was emanating from the floorboards beneath her hands. It was a biting, penetrating cold that felt like it was coming from deep within the earth. June stared at the stain. It wasn't a water stain. It wasn't old paint. It was a dark, permanent shadow. She noticed, for the first time, that one of the boards looked loose. Its edges weren't flush with the others. "Why did you take my room?" The question echoed in her mind, but its meaning had changed. It wasn't an accusation of theft. It was a question of sacrilege. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a nursery, and it was a tomb. The mother hadn't just died in childbirth in this room, as the landlord's terrified eyes had silently confirmed. The spirit wasn't searching for a baby that had been taken away. It was searching for the baby that had been left behind. June's blood ran colder than the floor. She looked at the loose board, the dark stain, the persistent, sickly sweet smell of decay that she had mistaken for old plumbing. The baby wasn't just metaphorically lost. It was here. It was in the room, buried right under her feet. As if summoned by the thought, a new sound joined the mother's returning sobs. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but to June, a pediatric nurse, it was unmistakable. From beneath the floor, she heard the impossible, muffled sound of a baby crying. Story 4. Legend of the Soul-Eating Demon. Tiger bleeds like a man, hunts like a beast. Grief, motivation, brother's soul trapped. Horror shift, transformation scene. The air in the Kwangdong jungle ceased to be air. It was a physical weight, a thick, wet blanket of sulfur and overripe decay that smothered Kiet's lungs. He had been walking for 3 days since leaving the last known human trail, guided only by a cold, sharp instinct that hummed in his chest. Right where the amulet he'd taken from his brother's empty room rested against his skin. This was the demon tiger's territory. The jungle itself was a monument to its malice. The canopy above was so dense that it cast the world in a perpetual, sickly green twilight. Trees grew in grotesque parodies of life, their trunks twisted into agonized spirals, their roots clawing out of the black earth like the hands of buried men. There were no bird calls. The only sounds were the drip of unseen water, the slither of something heavy in the undergrowth, and the frantic, pounding drum of Kiet's own heart. He was a hunter. He was born of the jungle. But this place was wrong. It was a rejection of nature. Kiet's calves burned. His shoulders ached from the weight of his pack and the heavy, silver-etched spear he carried. But the physical pain was a distant echo. The only thing that felt real was the grief. It was no longer a sadness. It had calcified into something solid and sharp. It was a tool. It was the whetstone upon which he sharpened his resolve. Surin. His brother's name was a prayer and a curse. Surin, who was too gentle for this world, who loved the sound of the paean and the smell of jasmine rice, had been taken, not just killed. The trackers had found pieces, shreds of his farkaumar, the tattered remains of his pack, and a single, perfect footprint. It was a tiger track, but one so large it defied belief, pressed inches deep into dry earth as if by an impossible weight. The village elder, her eyes clouded with cataracts and fear, had tried to stop him. You do not hunt a beast, Kiet. You hunt a suafi, a ghost tiger. It does not kill for hunger. It kills to eat the soul. Kiet had spat on the ground. Then I will hunt a ghost. Now, he believed her. The tracks he followed were fresh, but they made no sense. They would vanish on open ground only to reappear on a high, rocky ledge no creature could leap to. They would stop, as if the beast had simply ceased to exist, then continue 20 yards later, moving in a perfect straight line through an impassable thicket of razor bamboo. This was not a hunt. This was a summoning. The suafi was drawing him in. It wanted him. He smelled it before he saw it. The sulfur and rot intensified, but underneath it, a new, horrifying scent. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, and the sickly sweet aroma of burnt sugar. He pushed through a curtain of black, slimy vines and found himself in a clearing. It was a pit, a sunken depression in the jungle floor, dominated by a colossal and ancient banyan tree. Its roots descended from its branches like the tangled entrails of a god, forming a dark, gaping maw at its base, a cave. This was the lair. Kiet's hand tightened on his spear. He could feel the silver inlay, cold against his sweat-slicked palm. He took a step, then froze. Hanging from one of the lower banyan roots, twisting gently in the dead air, was a small leather pouch tied with a red string. Kiet's breath hitched. It was the pouch he had given Surin on his 18th birthday, to hold the coins he'd saved. Denial, hot and sharp, flared in his throat. It took it, he whispered, his voice cracking. A trophy, the beast. It killed him. And it took it. The rage was so absolute, so blinding, that it almost drove him to his knees. It was a white-hot fire that burned away his exhaustion, his fear, his very sense of self. All that remained was the hunter, the avenger. Surin! He screamed, his voice shattering the unholy silence. He didn't care. He wanted it to come. He wanted to see the thing that had feasted on his brother's life. Come out! Face me, you coward! The jungle answered, but the sound did not come from the cave. It came from above. A low, guttural growl that sounded less like an animal and more like a rock slide. It was a vibration that Kiet felt in his teeth, in the bones of his skull. He looked up, his eyes wide. It was crouched on one of the highest, thickest branches, staring down at him. It had been watching him the entire time. Kiet's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It was a tiger, yes, but it was a blasphemy. It was impossibly large, its shoulders thick with knotted muscle, standing higher than a water buffalo. Its fur was a diseased, patchy orange-black, matted with mud and something dark and glistening. But the stripes were wrong. They weren't black. They were a deep, dark indigo, and they seemed to move, coalescing and separating like oil on water, forming patterns that almost looked like screaming faces before dissolving again. And then it opened its eyes. They were not the yellow, slitted eyes of a jungle cat. They were round, human, and glowed with a burning, hateful, cobalt blue light. It didn't roar. It shrieked. The sound was a physical blow, a high-pitched, tearing scream that was horribly, unmistakably human. It was the sound of a man's final, agonizing moment of death, amplified and distorted through the throat of a monster. Kiet barely had time to raise his spear before it dropped. It didn't leap. It fell, crashing into the clearing with a force that shook the ground. It was not the graceful pounce of a predator. It was a clumsy, brutal, hateful impact. It lunged. Kiet, driven by pure instinct, threw himself to the side. The beast's claws, long as knives and dripping with a black, viscous fluid, tore through the space where he had been. They raked against the banyan root, and the sound was not of claw on wood, but of steel on stone, sending chips of petrified bark flying. The Sua Fi turned, its movements unnervingly fluid for its bulk. It stared at Kiet, its blue eyes incandescent with a cold, analytical intelligence. Hunts like a beast, thinks like a man. It wasn't just a monster. It was a mind, a consciousness trapped in a cage of supernatural fury. "I will send you to hell," Kiet hissed, planting the butt of his spear in the soft earth. The tiger shrieked again, the sound tearing at Kiet's sanity, and charged. This was not a fight. It was an execution. Kiet was fast, but the beast was wrong. It moved with a disjointed, unnatural gait, seeming to lag for a moment before lunging forward with impossible speed, as if unbound by the laws of physics. Kiet thrust his spear, the silver tip bit deep into the creature's shoulder. The Sua Fi didn't even slow down. It absorbed the blow as if it were a mosquito bite. It swung a massive paw, not with its claws, but as a club. The blow caught Kiet in the chest, throwing him backward as if he'd been struck by a log. He crashed against the wall of the clearing, the air exploding from his lungs. His spear was gone, still embedded in the creature's shoulder. He felt ribs crack. Black spots danced in his vision. He was powerless. This thing was a god, a dark, forgotten god of the Kruang Dong. The beast stalked toward him, slow now. It was savoring this. It lowered its massive head, the blue eyes burning into his. It opened its jaws, and Kiet gagged. The smell was overwhelming. Sulfur, rot, and that sweet, burning jasmine. Its teeth were not feline. They were a mix of fangs and shattered, human-like molars, packed into gums that were black with necrosis. It was 3 feet from him. 2. Kiet was trapped. He saw his death. He saw the void that had swallowed his brother. Surin, the grief, the sharp, cold tool. It gave him one last surge of strength. He wasn't unarmed. His hand fumbled at his belt, finding the heavy, consecrated maquila knife, the one blessed by the monks. Its handle wrapped in the saosin threads. As the beast opened its jaws to deliver the killing bite, its throat exposed, Kiet roared. He surged up from the ground, not with the strength of his broken body, but with the pure, unadulterated force of his love for his brother. He drove the knife, all 10 inches of blessed steel and saosin, upward and deep into the monster's throat. The world stopped. The Sua Fi froze. Its burning blue eyes widened, not in anger, but in what looked like shock. A new sound, not a shriek, not a growl, a wet, choking gasp. The creature stumbled back, its massive paws clutching at its throat, and it began to bleed. Kiet stared at the blood pouring from the wound, spattering onto the black earth. It wasn't the dark, thick ichor he expected. It wasn't the black fluid that dripped from its claws. It was red. It was bright, human red, and it steamed in the cold, damp air. The Sua Fi staggered, its breath coming in ragged, wet sobs. It looked down at the knife in its throat, then up at Kiet. The blue fire in its eyes flickered, dimmed, and for a single horrifying instant was replaced by a look of pure, terrified confusion. Then it collapsed. It hit the ground with a shuddering, final crash. Kiet stood panting, his body a symphony of pain. His ribs screamed. But he had done it. It was over. He had avenged Surin. He limped toward the massive, twitching carcass, Pulling his spear from its shoulder, he would take the head. He would bring it back to the village and burn it on a pyre of holy wood. He stood over the beast. It was gurgling, its lifeblood pooling around it. And then the change began. It started as a tremor, a low, violent spasm that rocked the tiger's entire body. Keat stepped back, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. A sound, a pop-pop-pop crackle, like a fire in green wood, echoed from the creature. It was the sound of bones. The beast's snout, the long, feline muzzle, began to recede. It didn't morph. It collapsed. As if punched inward by an invisible fist, flesh pooling and folding, the long fangs cracked and fell out, replaced by smaller teeth pushing through the bleeding gums. The shoulders, the massive, powerful haunches of the tiger shuddered, and then, with a wet, tearing sound, the shoulder blades snapped and realigned, shrinking, narrowing. The fur, the matted, orange-black fur began to retract. It didn't fall out. It retracted, in shivering, agonizing waves, pulling back into the skin like needles, revealing pale, sweat-drenched human flesh underneath. The smell was horrific, a wave of ozone and burning hair. The paws, this was the worst. The massive, clawed paws spasmed. The black claws snapped back into the flesh, and the paws broke. The bones cracked and lengthened, twisting, the pads melting away as they reformed into long, slender hands. The entire transformation took less than 30 seconds, and it was the most agonizing, unnatural thing Keat had ever witnessed. It was the sound of a body at war with itself, of nature being ripped apart and rewritten, piece by bloody piece. The gurgling finally stopped. The silence that fell was more terrifying than the screams. Where the 300-kilo demon tiger had been, there was now a man. He was naked, emaciated, and lying in a pool of his own blood. His limbs were twisted at unnatural angles, broken by the violence of the change. He was impossibly pale, his skin covered in a sheen of foul-smelling sweat. Keat's spear slipped from his trembling hand and clattered to the ground. His mind simply shut down. He couldn't understand. It was a trick, a Suafi illusion. He took a shuffling step forward. The man on the ground was breathing, short, shallow, agonizing breaths. The knife Keat had driven into the tiger's throat was still there, protruding from the man's collarbone. "No," Keat whispered. "No, it's not possible." He knelt beside the broken form, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He reached out a shaking hand and brushed the matted, sweat-soaked hair from the man's face. The face was young, scarred, and horribly, intimately familiar. Keat stopped breathing. It was Surin. It was his brother. His eyes were closed, his face contorted in a mask of pain, but it was him. The small, crescent-shaped scar on his chin from falling out of a mango tree, the way his left eyebrow quirked, even in agony. "Surin?" Keat's voice was a dead thing. The denial shattered, and the grief that rushed in was a tsunami, so vast and absolute it annihilated him. His revenge, his hunt, his rage, it was all a lie. He hadn't been hunting the thing that killed his brother. He had been hunting his brother. The Suafi didn't just eat the soul, it became the soul. The curse of the Kruang Dong. It didn't kill its victims. It took them. It turned them into this. "Oh, gods! Surin, what did I do?" Kiet sobbed, the sound tearing from his throat. He touched his brother's cheek. "What did I do to you?" Surin's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer burning blue. They were his own. They were the gentle, soft, brown eyes Ket had known his entire life. And they were filled with a universe of pain, confusion, and terror. He tried to speak. His jaw was misaligned, broken from the transformation. Only a wet, choking sound came out. "He's in there. He's been in there this whole time. He's been trapped, watching." The thought was so horrific it drove Keat back. He scrambled away from his brother's body. his hands covered in Surin's blood. He looked at his knife, still embedded in his brother's chest. He had murdered his brother. Surin's eyes, his real eyes, locked with Kiet's. He recognized him. He lifted one of his broken, newly formed hands. It was a gesture of agonizing, slow effort. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't afraid of Kiet. He was reaching for him. Kiet's world ended. He was on his knees, his mind hollowed out. He was completely, utterly, and finally broken. He was powerless. His quest for vengeance had led him to this, the ultimate damnation. He started to crawl back to Surin, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he wept. "Surin, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I'll get you help." He reached for the knife, to pull it out. Surin's eyes widened. He gurgled, a sound of desperate warning. No, but it was too late. The moment Kiet's fingers touched the saosin threads on the knife's handle, his brother's body convulsed. A new sound began, a low, deep hum. The transformation, it wasn't over. The brown, human eyes flickered behind them, like a light being turned on in a dark room. The cobalt blue ignited. "No," Kiet whispered, snatching his hand back. Surin's body arched off the ground, a silent scream tearing his mouth open. The flesh began to stretch. The fur, that matted, filthy fur, began to push its way back out of his pores, covering his pale skin in an instant. The transformation was reversing. The beast was reasserting itself. It was healing. The bones in his hands snapped, curling back into claws. The face began to stretch, the jaw unhinging, the snout pushing forward. Surin was still in there. Through the agony, his eyes, half brown, half blue, found Kiet's. It was a plea, a clear, silent, desperate plea. "Kill me. Please don't let me become it again. Free me." Kiet was paralyzed, frozen. His spear was 10 feet away. His knife was helping the monster, sealing the wound. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill his brother. He couldn't strike the final blow. But he couldn't let that thing live. He was trapped, kneeling in the mud, his hands slick with his brother's blood, his mind shattered by grief. The Suafi let out a roar. It was a wet, bifurcated sound. Half human sob, half bestial shriek. It was rising. The broken, emaciated body of Surin was swelling, muscles and fur and bone twisting and reforming, growing back into the dark god of the jungle. Kiet just watched, tears carving tracks through the grime on his face. He was paralyzed by a grief so total, it had become a physical anchor. The beast, its form now halfway between man and monster, its face a grotesque mask of both, turned its head, its burning blue eyes, now dominant, fixed on the weeping, motionless man. It was hungry. The shadow of the reforming Suafi rose, eclipsing the small, broken figure of Kiet, and the last thing he heard was the snick of claws, long as knives, extending from his brother's hands. The decision was not made. It was born of sheer, adrenalized instinct. For 6 days, David had been a prisoner of Ward 3E. 6 days of listening to the humid, oppressive silence of the Sanam Luang Sanatorium, a silence broken only by the wet shuffling of her feet and the distant, structural groans of the jungle reclaiming its own. His equipment was useless. The EMF reader had shattered on day 2, hurled against the wall not by a visible force, but by a sudden, localized spike in barometric pressure that had felt like a physical punch. His digital recorder, his last bastion of sanity, now only played back a loop of a single, agonizing whisper. "Chur Sung, not finished, hold still." Tom was gone. That was the truth that had finally calcified in David's gut. Tom, his partner, the skeptic, the one who was supposed to keep him grounded, had vanished on day 3. He'd gone to investigate the generator room in the basement. He had not returned. David had spent a full day calling his name, his voice growing hoarse. until the matron had appeared in the doorway. She had looked almost solid in the twilight, her starched white nurse's uniform impossibly clean, save for the dark, wet stains that blossomed around her collar and cuffs. She had pressed a single, ice-cold finger to her lips. "Hush, dear," she'd whispered, her voice a reedy sigh of chloroform and decay. "You'll wake the other patients, he's resting." They all are. Now, David knew what resting meant. He'd seen them, the other patients in the ward, pale, translucent figures huddled in the corners of the peeling rooms, their spectral forms tethered to the rusting bed frames. They were the ones who had come before, the curious, the lost, the thrill-seekers. All of them resting, all of them unfinished. This was the pattern. This was the truth he had come seeking. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a demon. It was an anchor. The Sanam Luang Sanatorium was not a hunting ground. It was a trap, built on a vortex of emotional energy, a place of intense, unresolved life and sudden, traumatic death, a hospital. It was the perfect anchor, and the matron was its willing, agonizing jailer. The final straw had come an hour ago. David had been huddled in his room, rationing the last of his protein bars. When she had entered, he had feigned sleep, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He felt the dip in the mattress as she sat beside him. He smelled the iron-rich tang of old blood and the sharp sting of antiseptic. She had tried to tuck him in with a blanket that was stiff with dried fluids and mould. Her hand, impossibly heavy and cold, had brushed his forehead. "The fever is still high," she'd murmured, her voice cracking with a bottomless, ancient sorrow. "You're not well enough to leave. No one is. I couldn't let them go. I can't let you." And in that moment, David understood. Emotional horror. Ghosts aren't evil. They're lost. She wasn't a monster trying to kill him. She was a tragedy trying to keep him. She was a broken loop. A duty she had failed in life. A promise to do no harm that had twisted in death to mean do not let go. The horror was not in her malice, but in her suffocating, so desperate care. He waited until her shuffling steps receded down the hall. He stood up, his body trembling. He had to abandon the place. He had to abandon Tom. He had to abandon the research, the expensive equipment, the very reason he was here. His only goal was to get from Ward 3E, past the central staircase, through the reclaimed jungle wing, down to the morgue, which his blueprints had shown was the only other exit, and out. He checked his supplies, a dying headlamp, one bottle of water, a multi-tool, and the heavy, iron-handled fire extinguisher from the hallway. It wasn't for the fire, it was for the doors. He cracked open his door. The hallway was a corridor of greenish-black mould. The air was thick, wet, and cold. He stepped out. The escape had begun. Every step was a betrayal. He was abandoning Tom to her. The thought was a physical weight, a scar already forming on his mind. He moved past the nurse's station, its old-fashioned switchboard choked with jungle vines that had punched through the concrete. A sound, a single marble, rolling slowly from the darkness of the children's ward to his left. Clack, clack, clack. It stopped directly in his path. He froze. This was a new tactic. "David!" The voice was Tom's. It was not a recording. It was clear, terrified, and coming from the pitch-black maw of the playroom. "David, is that you? God, I'm so cold. I can't find the door. Help me." David squeezed his eyes shut. The mental scar tore deeper. This was her. She was using Tom's voice, Tom's fear, or worse, she was using Tom. "I can't feel my legs. Man," the voice pleaded, breaking into a sob. "Please, don't leave me here. She said I was a bad patient." Common thread. They died unfinished. Tom, the skeptic, dead in a basement, his journey cut short. His spirit, now just another tool in her spectral arsenal, lost. "I'm sorry. Tom," David whispered, his own voice breaking. He He stepped over the marble and ran. "Coward!" Tom's voice shrieked behind him, no longer pleading, but filled with a hollow, echoing rage that was not his own. "You're leaving me to rot! You'll rot too! She won't let you finish!" The hospital itself seemed to agree. This was the location power. The sanatorium was her accomplice. As David sprinted for the central stairwell, the very architecture fought him. Doors slammed shut down the corridor, a domino-like volley of cracking wood. The peeling paint on the walls seemed to writhe, blistering and bubbling as if the concrete beneath was boiling. The air thickened, becoming a soupy, gelatinous weight. He was running through invisible cobwebs, each strand a filament of icy energy that clung to his skin and clothes. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of patients begging him to stay, to lie down, to rest. He reached the stairwell. It was a gaping wound in the center of the building, a spiral of concrete and rusting rebar. He looked down. The ground floor was 5 stories below. But the stairs were partially collapsed, blocked by a mass of debris and jungle. This was the part he dreaded, the jungle wing, a whole section of the hospital that had been surrendered to the rainforest. The blueprints had shown it was a structural weak point, but also a potential bypass. Location power, temples, jungles, hospitals, spirit's anchor. He knew, intellectually, why this place was so charged. The hospital had been built on land stolen from the jungle, on ground that was already considered sacred, a place of power for the local tribes. They hadn't just built a hospital, they had desecrated a temple. Now, the 2 anchors, the raw, ancient power of the jungle and the focused, modern trauma of the hospital, were fused. He climbed over the broken banister, his headlamp beam cutting a weak cone into the chaos. He landed on a slick mattress of moss and rotting leaves. The air here was different, not antiseptic and iron, but wet earth, blooming orchids, and the carrion stink of decay. Vines thick as a man's arm snaked through shattered windows. Roots had buckled the tiled floor. It was a greenhouse of the dead, and they were here, too, not the matron's ghosts. These were older, slower. They were shades of the land, the indigenous workers who had died building this monument to colonial hubris. They flickered between the giant ferns, their faces indistinct, their forms more like shadows burned into the air. They watched him, not with malice, but with a cold, earthy indifference. They were part of the jungle, and he was just another fleeting, warm-blooded thing trespassing on their eternal, unfinished vigil. He pushed through the foliage, his feet sinking into the sludge of a collapsed floor. He was halfway across when a vine, or something that looked like a vine, lashed out and wrapped around his ankle. He cried out as it tightened, pulling him off his feet. He fell hard onto his left side. A sickening, wet snap echoed in the enclosed space. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded from his forearm. He screamed. It was broken. His left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly visible beneath the skin. This was the physical scar. The vine pulled again, dragging him toward a water-filled crater in the floor. He saw other shapes beneath the surface. Skeletons, for unfinished work. "No!" he roared. He slammed the base of the fire extinguisher onto the vine. It was unnaturally tough, but the iron head of the tool finally severed it. It recoiled with a wet, sucking sound. He scrambled to his feet, cradling his shattered arm. The pain was a living thing, a fire that threatened to consume his consciousness. He was going into shock. He had to keep moving. The matron would sense his weakness. She would come. He bit down on the strap of his bag, the taste of canvas and sweat filling his mouth, just to ground himself. He half fell, half slid down a cascade of debris, his broken arm screaming with every jolt. He was in the basement. The air was frigid. The jungle was gone, replaced by stark, weeping concrete. This was the foundation, and set into the far wall. He could see them, the ancient, carved stones of the original Wat that had been buried here, the temple, the true anchor. And this was the morgue, the steel, Refrigerated doors lined the wall, each one dented and rusted. One of them, at the far end, was slightly ajar. "You should not be down here." Her voice was not a whisper. It was sharp, authoritative, the voice of a head nurse. David turned, his headlamp beam finding her. She stood 10 feet away, blocking the corridor that led to the generator room and the exit. She looked different, no longer the sorrowful carer. She was rigid. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes black pits. The dark stains on her uniform were fresh, and they were spreading. "This area is restricted," she stated. "The patients are not to wander. You are very, very sick. You must return to your bed." "He's not here," David spat, his voice shaking with pain and rage. "Tom, he's not resting. He's in one of those drawers, isn't he?" The matron's face flickered. The mask of fury cracked, revealing the abyss of grief beneath. He was non-compliant. He tried to leave. The fever was too high. He would have what? David stalked forward, adrenaline overpowering the pain in his arm. "He would have lived. He would have burned," she shrieked, the sound so powerful it blew dust from the ceiling. The steel doors of the morgue rattled in their frames. They all burned. The fire, it moved so fast. The West Wing. I locked the doors, to keep them safe, to keep the fire out. But it was already inside. I could hear them. I could hear them screaming for me. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. The truth, the final piece of the pattern, common thread. They died unfinished. She hadn't just been a nurse. She had been their executioner, an accidental one, a tragedy born of a terrible choice. "I couldn't get the doors open." She was sobbing now, her form dissolving and reforming. "The keys, the smoke. I died outside the door, listening to them burn. I failed them. I failed my duty. Kung I trong so ho, chong kak cho thang kui." None of them chose to become demons. She was not a demon. She was a self-appointed, eternal penitent. She had died, unfinished, and so no one else could ever be finished. No one could ever leave. No one could burn again. She was saving them, over and over, from the fire that had consumed her. Ho chi mon ket thuk hang tring kui kung kuming. They just want to finish their final journey. "I can't let you go," she whispered, her form solidifying again, her face now a terrible, weeping mask of resolve. "I can't fail again. It's time for your treatment." She advanced. The cold from her was a solid wall. David's headlamp flickered, the beam dying. He was in the dark with her, his arm a broken, useless weight. The exit just yards behind her. He had one chance, not to fight her. He couldn't. He had to escape her. "You didn't fail them," he said, his voice hoarse. She stopped. "What? You didn't fail them," he repeated, louder. "The fire is over. It's been over for 50 years. You're the only one still here." "Liar," she hissed, but she hesitated. "Look at them." David gestured with his good arm toward the morgue drawers. "They're not here. They're gone. You're the only one left. Your journey is finished. You can let go." It was a gamble, a desperate, last-second plea to the fragment of the woman she had been, for a heartbeat. The impossible happened. The matron looked confused. She turned, her head tilting, as if listening for the screams that had defined her death. There was only silence. The oppressive, cold weight in the room lifted. The anchor slipped. David didn't wait. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't try to be a hero. He ran. He lunged forward with his good shoulder, slamming into her. It was like hitting a side of frozen beef, a solid, unyielding mass of cold. But his words had given him the 1 second he needed. She was off balance, her concentration broken. He scrambled past her into the generator room. The door to the outside, a heavy steel fire door, was just ahead. He hit the panic bar with his full body weight. The door flew open. He burst out of the Sanam Luang Sanatorium, and into the sunrise. He didn't stop running. He crashed through the jungle undergrowth, the humid, living air a shocking contrast to the sterile death of the morgue. He ran until he was 50 yards from the building, until he tripped on a root and collapsed into the mud. He lay there, sobbing, for a long time. He was a wreck, a barely living thing. His left arm was a ruin of splintered bone and blood. His body was a constellation of bruises. His mind was a smoking crater, forever imprinted with Tom's last, false cry and the matron's weeping face. He had survived. He had barely survived. He had escaped. He had abandoned his friend, his work, and a piece of his own soul. The consequences were permanent. He finally, painfully, rolled over and looked back at the sanatorium. In the bright, clear light of morning, it was just a building, a rotting, concrete husk being swallowed by a green tide. It was quiet, but David knew the truth. She was still in there. His words hadn't saved her. They had only distracted her. She was lost, not evil. She was anchored. She was unfinished. Right now, she was probably walking the halls of Ward 3E, her rage and sorrow recoalescing. She was checking on her patients, and she was waiting for the fever to rise, waiting for the next soul who was unfortunate enough to be unfinished. He knew, as he cradled his broken arm and began the long, agonizing walk toward the distant sound of a river, that he hadn't broken the pattern. He had only confirmed it. He hadn't brought back a story of demons to be vanquished. He'd brought back the truth. There are no monsters. There are only tragedies, anchored to the earth by the power of their own unfinished journeys. If you hear crying, do not answer. The digital static that hissed from my laptop speakers was no longer just white noise. It felt intentional. After the events of the last few weeks, the footsteps in the attic, the reflection in the camera lens that moved a fraction of a second too late, the bone-deep chill that clung to the air near the floor. I had fled the old vicarage, but fleeing, I was learning, was not the same as escaping. The footage was contaminated. I knew it. Every time I reviewed the clips, the anomalies were more pronounced. A shadow in the corner of a frame that hadn't been there on the first pass. A faint, weeping sound buried beneath the audio track. A sound I hadn't heard while recording. I was no longer an investigator. I was a carrier. My search for answers had led me away from the thrill-seeking forums and ghost-hunting bravado, deep into the dry, academic archives of local history. It led me to one name, Dr. Alistair Wyatt, a retired professor of folklore and regional anthropology. He lived in a small, cluttered cottage 2 hours away from the vicarage, surrounded by stacks of books that seemed to be holding the walls up. He didn't want to see me. His emails were curt. "Stop," one read. "You are meddling with an echo that has learned to shout. Leave it." I drove to his house anyway, my camera bag heavy on the passenger seat, not as a tool, but as a piece of damning evidence. The rain was a relentless sheet as I knocked on his door. He opened it. A man in his late 70s with eyes as sharp and grey as a winter sea. He looked at me, then at the camera bag, and sighed. "You brought it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I need to understand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Understanding is a privilege," Wyatt said, stepping aside to let me in. The house smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and something faintly herbal, like dried lavender. "What you're seeking is a rule book. You think that if you know the rules, you can win the game. You're wrong. This isn't a game. It's a trap. And you've sprung it." He sat me down in a worn leather armchair. He didn't offer tea. "You went to the old vicarage on Willow Creek," he stated. I nodded. "You heard the stories. The 3 a.m. cry, the mirror ghoul, the ground-bound spirit. You thought they were separate legends, different ghosts for different nights of the week. They're not, are they?" Wyatt leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "No, they are symptoms. They are the fragmented, agonizing rules of a single, catastrophic event. You haven't been hunting ghosts, son. You've been documenting the anatomy of a breakdown. backstory of the ghost event. And then he told me the story. Not a ghost story, but a tragedy. Her name was Clara, he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. This was in the 1880s. The house was new then, a symbol of status for her and her husband, a wealthy merchant who was rarely home. Clara was beautiful, vain, by all accounts. Her prized possession was a tall, silver-backed cheval mirror, imported from France. They said she spent more time communing with her reflection than with any living person. He paused, tamping tobacco into a pipe he had no intention of lighting. She had a child, a little boy, and in him she found something to love more than her own image. He was a frail thing, always coughing, but he was hers. Then, the winter of 1887. Diphtheria. It swept through the valley like a scythe. My own throat tightened. I knew this part. I had felt it. The boy grew sick. The fever was relentless. Clara, frantic, did what she had always done. She went to her mirror, but this time she wasn't admiring. She was bargaining. She prayed to her own reflection, to God, to anyone who would listen. She promised to shatter the mirror, to give up her vanity, her beauty, anything, if her son would be spared. Wyatt's eyes closed for a moment. It was a promise made in desperation, and it was not answered. The boy died. The parish records are precise. The attending physician recorded the time of death. He looked at me. Guess. 3 in the morning, I whispered. 3 a.m. Precisely, Wyatt confirmed. The dead hour, not because of demons, but because it is the coldest, quietest, most hopeless part of the night, the moment the human spirit is at its lowest ebb. Her grief was total. It was absolute. It was a physical force. The doctor reported that her scream was a sound he had never heard before, a tearing of the veil. But after the scream, there was only silence and weeping. She went to her room. She looked at her cheval mirror, at her own beautiful, tear-streaked face, the face of a woman whose promise had been rejected. And she broke. She didn't just smash the mirror. She clawed it, cutting her hands. She toppled it. And then she fell. She collapsed onto the floor, her hands bleeding, her voice raw from wailing. She lay on the cold floorboards, weeping for her son, and she never got up again. I felt a cold dread, a sickness rising from my stomach. What do you mean, she never got up? I mean exactly that. The servants, horrified, tried to move her. She fought them. She refused food, refused water. She lay on the ground, curling into herself, weeping. She was grounding herself in her grief. She died there, on the floor, 3 days later, dehydration and, according to the coroner, a profound failure of the will to live. Her spirit did not pass. It fractured. It shattered, just like her mirror. Her vanity, her grief, and her agony were imprinted on the house, but not as a single entity. They became a set of compulsive, binding rules, a spiritual trap, revealed by witness, document, or ritual. You see, Wyatt continued, gesturing to a stack of leather-bound journals on his desk, I've read the diaries of those who lived thereafter. They are unanimous. The entity in that house is not intelligent, not in the way we are. It is an echo, a loop of pure, concentrated misery, but it's an echo that has learned. Learned what? To seek resonance, to find others who feel what it feels, despair, loneliness, fear. It doesn't want to kill you. It wants you to join. He stood and pulled a book from the shelf. He opened it to a page marked with a dried, brittle leaf. It was a handwritten journal from 1903. The first family, Wyatt said. The wife writes, I hear a woman crying at night. It is always at 3. It sounds like it comes from inside my own head. I am so terribly cold. A few pages later, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For a second, I did not recognize myself. My face was hateful, twisted, and the final entry, before they fled. He's gone, my husband. He said he was going to the cellar. I found him, on the floor, just lying on the cold stone, curled up, weeping. He would not look at me. He would not get up. My blood ran cold. The clues, the fragmented pieces of my own investigation. It wasn't a collection of different ghosts. It was her. All earlier clues now make sense. "This is what you found, isn't it?" Wyatt demanded. I could only nod, my mind racing, putting the pieces together. Never open the door when you hear someone crying at 3 a.m. "It's not a real person, obviously," Wyatt said. "But it's more than a recording. It's a lure. 3 a.m. is the moment of her breaking. The sound is the echo of her grief. It's a question, a plea for company. Do you feel this too? When you open the door, when you call out, 'Who's there?' you're not just answering. You are consenting. You are saying, 'Yes, I hear you. Yes, I will share this.' You are opening your own door to her. You are inviting the echo into your own head. Don't look in the mirror for too long." Her vanity was her sin, Wyatt explained, his voice low. And the mirror was her confessional, her altar, and her executioner. When she smashed it, she didn't destroy her reflection. She multiplied it. She is in every reflective surface in that house. Mirrors, windows, standing water, even the dark screen of a television or a phone. My hand instinctively went to the camera in my bag. Yes, especially the lens of a camera. When you look into a mirror, you are looking for yourself. But if you look too long, your focus blurs, the light changes, and you'll see her. She's looking back. She is trapped between worlds, in that looking glass space. She sees you, a living, warm person, and she hates you for it, but she also covets it. She wants to trade places. Look long enough, and you give her time to imprint, to swap her reflection for yours. I remembered the footage, the reflection in the darkened window. It wasn't just my reflection, it was me. But smiling, a cold, hateful, broken-toothed smile. And don't sleep too close to the ground. This is the most dangerous rule, Wyatt said, his face grim. This is her domain. She is the cold. She is the floor. She gave up her right to stand, to be human. She is ground-bound. She crawls. She drags herself, weighed down by a sorrow that is as physical as gravity. When you sleep on a mattress on the floor, when you lie on a rug, you are entering her world. You are lying with her. It's the ultimate invitation. It's saying, "I will lie here with you. I will not get up either." It's an act of utter spiritual surrender. I thought of the sleeping bag I had rolled out on the living room floor. The night I woke up, paralyzed, feeling an impossible, crushing weight on my chest. It wasn't a weight. It was her. She had been lying on top of me, sharing her despair. And then, Wyatt delivered the final, terrible synthesis, the part that connected her past to my present. Sensory fear, cold breath on your neck. "You felt it, haven't you?" he asked. The cold, not a draft, a specific cold, like a pinprick of ice on your skin. They always report it on the back of the neck or on the ankle. It's her. She's crawling. When you feel that cold on your ankle, she is dragging herself past you. But when you feel it on your sack, viewer challenge, what would you do? Imagine it. You are alone. You are reading this. You feel a sudden, unnatural chill. It's not the AC. It's not a draft. It's a focused, pinpoint cold, moving slowly up your spine. It reaches the nape of your neck. It feels wet, like a snowflake melting, and then you feel a puff of air, colder than ice, against your ear. What would you do? That means she has risen, Wyatt concluded. She has found something interesting enough to pull herself up from the floor. She is looking over your shoulder. She is watching what you're watching. My stomach dropped. I had felt that. In the editing bay, I thought it was just fatigue, the air conditioning, but I had been watching the footage of the mirror. She had been watching it with me. This brought us to the final, horrifying point, the one that was not in the old journals, the one that was new, breaking the wall. Ghosts follow those who listen. You've changed the equation, son, Wyatt said. And for the first time, I heard genuine fear in his voice. For 100 years, she was a localized phenomenon, a loop, trapped by the house's geography and her own rules. You had to go to her to be in danger. He pointed a shaking finger at my camera bag. But you and your camera, you and your microphones, you didn't just observe. You recorded. You captured the echo. You gave it a new vessel, and then you connected it to the internet. The room seemed to spin. What are you saying? I'm saying she's not in the house anymore. Not just in the house. She's in the recording. She's in the signal. She's in the file. Every time you play it, you are broadcasting her grief. You are sending out her call. And anyone who watches, anyone who listens, they are answering. Ghosts follow those who listen, he whispered, his eyes wide. She was bound by grief, but you've given her a new binding, attention. She is no longer just Clara's misery. She is an entity that feeds on being observed. She has learned. From you, from us. He gestured to the laptop I'd idly opened on his coffee table. The screen was dark, but not off, a perfect black mirror. You and your viewers, he spat. You're all looking into the mirror. You're all listening for the 3 a.m. cry. You're all lying on the floor of your living rooms, staring at your screens. You're not just breaking her rules, you're fulfilling them on a global scale. The blood drained from my face. I looked at the dark screen of my laptop, and in that black, reflective surface, I saw Dr. Wyatt. I saw his cluttered study. And I saw a third thing. A pale, distorted face, looking out. Not from the room, from inside the screen. It was pressed against the glass from the other side. Its mouth was open in a silent, weeping "oh." I slammed the laptop shut. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely work the clasp. "Get out," Wyatt said. It wasn't a request. "What do I do?" I pleaded. "You can't do anything. It's done," he said, turning his back on me. "You wanted the origin story. There it is. You wanted the rules. You've got them. But you've also broadcast them to the world. You've turned a local tragedy into a global virus." He walked to his door and opened it. The rain was still lashing down. "Go and stop this. Delete the footage. Destroy the hard drives. Pray that it's not too late. Pray that she's satisfied with you." I stumbled out into the storm. I threw the camera bag into the trunk of my car and locked it. As if it were a coffin, I am writing this now from a motel room, hundreds of miles away. I haven't slept in 2 days. I can't. The floor is too close. I look in the bathroom mirror, but only for a second, just long enough to splash water on my face. And I've unplugged the clock, because I know, even without it, that 3 a.m. is coming. This is my final post, my confession, my warning. I was wrong. The ghost isn't in the machine. The ghost is the machine. The signal is the entity. And every person who watches, you're not just a viewer. You are a new house, a new mirror, a new floor. Look away. Turn it off. Don't look for me. If you hear crying, if you hear static that sounds like weeping, it's not coming from your speakers. It's coming from inside your head. She's found you. Do not answer. The screen fades to black. But does the story truly end? Was it just a figment of digital folklore, or was it a warning? What do you think? Do you believe the entity is truly gone? Or has it just found a new place to hide? Perhaps somewhere much closer than you think. In many cultures, these legends are not just entertainment. They are living histories. echoes of real spiritual energy that persist long after the original events. They serve as a profound reminder that the veil between our world and the next is alarmingly thin. They teach us that some boundaries should never be crossed, and that some spirits, bound by rage or sorrow, refuse to be forgotten. But here is the most terrifying thought. The scariest thing isn't what you just watched. It's the fact that not all spirits stay within the screen. By watching, by listening, we give them energy, we invite them in. Are you sure you're alone? We want to hear your theories. But a piece of advice: don't watch alone. If you're brave enough to continue this journey, subscribe if you dare. We have countless more legends to unearth, and you won't want to miss the shadows we explore next. Tell us what darkness to chase. Comment, which legend next?